The war hadn't started with hatred, it hadn't even started with hostility. For nearly 2 decades, humans and the Cathari Compact had existed in cautious but productive peace. The Cathari were not conquerors by nature. Tall, radially symmetrical beings with layered, crystalline skin and slow, deliberate movements, they valued stability above expansion. Their civilization favored long-term planning, rigid treaties, and clearly defined borders. Borders they believed absolutely had been agreed upon. Trade routes had flourished between human and Cathari space. Raw materials exchanged hands. Scientific data was shared. Navigation charts were standardized. There were even joint research stations along the frontier. Quiet places where human engineers and Cathari analysts worked side by side, comparing notes on stellar physics and propulsion theory. The relationship wasn't warm, but it was respectful. And then came the incident. A survey fleet operating under outdated human star charts crossed into a sparsely populated region both sides believed was unclaimed. The Cathari patrol that intercepted them assumed the incursion was deliberate, a test of resolve, perhaps even the first step in a territorial grab. Warnings were issued. The humans never received them. A relay buoy malfunctioned. A translation protocol lagged. By the time the fleets made contact, both sides believed the other had already ignored a clear demand to withdraw. Shots were fired. Once blood had been spilled, neither government could afford to appear weak. What should have been resolved by a conference became a skirmish. The skirmish became a campaign. The campaign hardened into a war neither side had planned for, and neither side now knew how to stop. Years passed. Both civilizations proved stubborn, adaptable, and frustratingly resilient. Human fleets matched Cathari formations. Every battle produced losses. Every victory was temporary. The front lines shifted slowly, almost reluctantly, as if the war itself were aware that it did not belong. For the Cathari, the conflict was an aberration, a destabilizing failure of diplomacy that demanded a firm response. For the humans, it was something worse. A problem without an ending, not because they were losing, but because they could not force the war to conclude. Human commanders could plan engagements. Human tacticians could exploit openings. Human crews could fight and survive. But every decision lagged behind reality. Orders crossed light years at the speed of light. Situation reports arrived already obsolete. By the time reinforcements responded, the battlefield had moved on. The humans weren't being outmatched. They were being outpaced. And so, away from the front lines, far from any inhabited system, humanity began work on the one thing that could end the stalemate. Not a new weapon, not a stronger fleet, but something far more disruptive. Communication that did not wait. The zero-point generator was not experimental. That distinction mattered to the humans. The theory behind it had been argued, refined, and proven decades earlier. What had taken time was not the mathematics, but the engineering. The careful work of building a system capable of accessing vacuum energy without destabilizing the space around it. By the time the war began, the technology already existed. By the time the war dragged on, it had been perfected. The first integration tests had been conservative. Low output, short activation windows, communication bursts measured in fractions of a second. Each time, the generator behaved exactly as the equations predicted. The real breakthrough came when it was paired with the communication array. Instantaneous transmission, no latency, no signal degradation. At 2 light-years, the system was flawless. At 5, it was stable. At 10, the signal was as clear as if the receiver were in the same room. The device worked. What limited it was not function, but power. The energy required to sustain the communication field increased sharply with distance. The curve was not linear, and it was not forgiving. Each additional jump demanded more power than the last, not by percentage, but by scale. At 20 light-years, the generator was operating comfortably within tolerance. At 50, the numbers began to climb rapidly. Still stable, still predictable, still within every safety margin the engineers had defined, but the projections for longer distances bent sharply upward. At 100 light-years, the required output exceeded anything that had ever been tested. Not because the generator could not produce it, but because no one had ever asked it to. That was why the test vessel carried no crew. It was an autonomous drone controlled by a purpose-built artificial intelligence designed for one task: observe, report, and proceed exactly as instructed. The drone departed quietly, traveling beyond established trade routes and out of the shadow of inhabited systems. It moved in deliberate increments, stopping at predetermined distances to activate the array and transmit a handshake signal back to human space. At 50 light-years, it powered up and waited. "Home," the drone transmitted. "I have reached 50 light-years. Are you receiving me?" The response arrived instantly. "We hear you," Control replied. "Signal is clear." The drone compared received data with its internal models. "Confirmed," it said. "Energy levels are stable. Containment fields nominal. Shielding is holding. No anomalous feedback detected." Engineers reviewed the telemetry in silence. "This is Control," a human voice said. "We concur. You may proceed." The drone acknowledged and moved on. At 75 light-years, the power curve steepened dramatically. "Home," the drone transmitted. "I am at 75 light-years. Communication latency remains 0. Power draw has increased by 230% relative to the previous test. Containment fields are compensating. All systems remain within tolerance." No alarm sounded. The numbers were high, but clean. "We copy," Control replied after a moment. "Telemetry is good." Another pause. Not delay, deliberation. "Proceed to 100 light-years," Control said. "You are authorized to execute test sequence Gamma at your discretion. Report status immediately upon activation." "Authorization acknowledged," the drone replied. "Proceeding." The drone jumped again. At 100 light-years, it came to rest alone in interstellar space. The generator idled, drawing minimal power as the AI reviewed projections. The next activation would push the system beyond any previously tested regime. The model said it should hold. The margins were narrow, but real. The drone waited. "Home," it transmitted. "I have reached 100 light-years. Standing by?" Across human space, scientists leaned forward, and they did not expect failure. But they understood that this was where scale had a habit of revealing surprises. What they did not know was that they were no longer the only ones watching. The Cathari had detected the drone days earlier. At first, they had dismissed it. A single human probe moving without stealth or escort. But its behavior was anomalous. It did not scan. It did not map. It did not maneuver tactically. It stopped. And then its power signature spiked. Not briefly, not explosively, but deliberately. Sustained output rising far beyond what a vessel of its size should have been capable of producing. Then it stopped. Then it moved again. At the next location, the power spike was larger. To the Cathari analysts, the pattern was unmistakable. No one ramps energy output like that unless they are testing something dangerous. And no one tests something dangerous in isolation unless they are trying to hide it. The conclusion was not reached in panic. It was reached calmly. The humans were developing a new kind of weapon, and it was nearing completion. The Cathari did not detect the probe by chance. It announced itself. The vessel did not mask its emissions, did not maneuver evasively, and did not attempt to disguise its trajectory. Its drive signature was unremarkable, its hull unarmed, its path straight and deliberate. At first, it was dismissed as a long-range sensor platform, another human curiosity wandering beyond contested space. But then it stopped. The probe halted in open interstellar space, far from any gravity well or strategic location. Moments later, its energy output rose sharply. Not a burst, not a spike, a sustained increase. Cathari analysts watched in silence as the readings stabilized at a level far beyond what the vessel's mass should have allowed. Then, just as deliberately, the output dropped. The probe resumed its journey. It traveled another measured distance. then stopped again. This time, the energy rise was greater, much greater. The pattern was unmistakable. Incremental movement, controlled escalation, repeated observation. This was not reconnaissance, it was testing. A senior analyst adjusted the projection, overlaying the probe's stops and energy curves. The line arced steeply upward. Each activation exceeds the last, she said. The increase is not linear. The chamber remained quiet. The Cathari had fought the humans long enough to understand their doctrine. They did not favor displays, they did not bluff. When humans tested weapons, they did so carefully, away from observers, away from allies, away from civilians. This probe was alone by design. A fleet commander studied the data, mandibles clicking softly in thought. They are measuring threshold, he said at last. Limits, failure points. Another analyst spoke. The power levels already exceed those required for any known human weapon. Yet they continue, the commander replied, which means the weapon is not complete. The probe jumped again. At the next stop, the energy signature surged to levels that forced several sensors into saturation. Containment fields flared, then stabilized. The vessel held. The room stiffened. No explosion followed, no radiation bloom, no debris. The probe simply waited. Silence filled the chamber. Finally, the commander spoke. If this is allowed to complete, he said, whatever they are building will be beyond our capacity to counter. There was no panic in his voice, only certainty. They test far from their territory, another officer added. They do not defend it. That suggests confidence, or that the device cannot yet be moved. The implication was clear. If the probe carried the weapon core or its control system, then capturing it now would deny the humans a decisive advantage, and studying it might grant one of their own. The decision followed naturally. We will intercept, the commander said, quietly. Encirclement forces were dispatched, instructed not to fire unless necessary. The objective was not destruction, but capture. The probe did not react. It did not accelerate. It did not alter course. It did not deploy countermeasures. It simply continued its measured progression, unaware, or unconcerned, that it was no longer alone. To the Cathari, this confirmed their assessment. Only a weapon nearing completion would be tested so openly, and only a civilization desperate to end a stalemated war would risk revealing it. The trap, they believed, was almost ready. They intended to spring it first. The drone reached 100 light-years and came to a halt. From human command, the telemetry was immediate and unsettling. Not wrong, not broken, but tight. Power draw surged as the zero-point core ramped toward operational output. Containment fields adjusted in rapid micro-corrections, their margins narrowing with every second. Still holding, still within tolerance. The drone reported in, its voice steady and uninflected. Final test position reached. 0-point output at 146% nominal. Containment fields compensating. Shield harmonic stable. The room exhaled. All right, the lead engineer said quietly. That's higher than we like, but it's clean. Before anyone could respond, the telemetry updated again. New contacts detected. Cathari vessels. Bearing 327. Range decreasing. Heads turned. What? The commander said. The tactical display populated with 4 Cathari signatures, emerging from FTL at extreme range and accelerating toward the drone's position. They followed it? Someone asked. Why would they? They're not firing, the tactical officer said. They're pacing it. The commander frowned. What are they doing? The Cathari ships adjusted formation, spreading out as they approached. No weapons charged, no signals transmitted. They simply closed the distance, matching the drone's stationary position with unsettling precision. The drone continued its steady stream of data. Contact range decreasing. Cathari vessels now within 10,000 kilometers. Power output increasing. 0-point draw at 168% nominal. That's too close, the engineer said. They're inside the field boundary. Why would they risk that? The commander muttered. On the Cathari flagship, uncertainty crept in. The device had not reacted. It had not fled. It had not powered down. It continued to draw energy, deliberately, methodically. This was not the pattern of a decoy, the Cathari commander said, nor of a sensor probe. An officer tilted its head. Then what is it? The commander watched the rising curve. Something unfinished. Back at human command, the drone's reports began arriving faster. Not louder, not panicked, but more frequent. Power escalation accelerating, containment field stress increasing, shield harmonics adjusting. They're trying to board it, the tactical officer said. Look at their vector. They're lining up. The commander's eyes widened. They think it's hardware. Silence. Then the engineer spoke almost to himself. They think it's a weapon. The next report came immediately. Cathari vessels within docking range. External field interference detected. Power draw increasing beyond a projected curve. The engineer snapped upright. They're interfering with the containment. That field was never designed for proximity. The commander clenched his jaw. We need to tell them to back off. We don't have a channel, the tactical officer said. Long-range comms won't reach this far. A beat. Then the engineer looked up slowly. The drone can. What? The commander said. The array, the engineer said quickly. It's not just transmitting data, it can relay conventional signals through the entanglement field. Realization spread. You're saying we can talk through the test device? Yes, the engineer said. If we route it through the drone. Do it, now. The drone reconfigured instantly. Relay mode enabled. External communication routed through zero-point array. The commander leaned forward. Cathari vessels, he said, voice tight. This is human command. You are receiving this message through the device you are approaching. On the Cathari bridge, the reaction was immediate, not fear, but shock. They are speaking, an officer said. Instantly. At this distance? Another asked. The commander stared at the probe. Continue. This device, the human commander said, is a communications test platform. That is why you are hearing us now. You are dangerously close to it. You need to move away immediately. Silence. Then the Cathari commander replied, more slowly now. You speak without delay. Through the device. Yes, the human said. That is its function. The telemetry cut back in, overriding the exchange. Warning. Power draw exceeding modeled behavior. Containment field stability degrading. Shield harmonics unstable. The engineer's voice shook. It's running away. The feedback loop is amplifying itself. Cathari vessels, the human commander said urgently. You need to get clear, now. This is no longer controlled. On the Cathari bridge, doubt spread like a fracture. If this is communication, an officer said, then we misjudged it, the commander finished. Another officer spoke, voice tight. We cannot contact high command. There are no relays within range. The commander's mandibles twitched. They had proof now. Too late. The drone's final reports came in rapid succession. Containment failure predicted. Power escalation accelerating. Structural integrity failing. Get away from it, the human commander shouted. You are inside the hazard radius. The Cathari commander stared at the probe. Bright, unstable, undeniable. All vessels disengage. The final transmission arrived without emphasis. Final report. Communication test successful. Catastrophic failure unavoidable. The spike tore through space. Not heat, not fire. Reality folded inward, collapsing into a silent, expanding sphere of nothingness. The drone vanished. The Cathari fleet vanished. Space itself recoiled. At human command, every display went dark. Telemetry collapsed. Signal integrity vanished. The drone's identifier flickered once and then disappeared. No explosion registered, no radiation bloom, nothing. Just empty space where something had been. The room was silent. Someone checked the sensors again. Then again. There's nothing, the tactical officer said quietly. No contacts, no debris, no signal. The lead engineer stared at the blank screen. That field release would have been enormous, he said. If anything was close. He stopped. The commander raised a hand. We don't know, he said. The engineer nodded slowly. The commander leaned back, suddenly looking very tired. They were too close, he said. They shouldn't have been there. No one argued. Another officer spoke carefully. If their ships were within the containment radius? The sentence was left unfinished. The commander closed his eyes. They'll think we did this on purpose. The room seemed to shrink. We were trying to talk faster, the engineer said. We were trying to end the war. His voice broke. It wasn't supposed to be a bomb. The commander didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. No, he said. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone. Outside the command room, the war continued, unaware that something irreversible had just happened. Inside, the humans were left staring at an empty piece of space, wondering what the silence would mean when it finally ended. Nothing came back from the test site. No distress calls, no retreat signatures, no debris. Long-range Cathari observation arrays recorded only a single event, a perfectly symmetrical release of energy, expanding beyond expected parameters and then collapsing into silence. Everything within viewable and sensor range vanished. The fleet was gone. For 10 years, the war between humans and the Cathari had dragged on across interstellar distances. Battles were rare, inconclusive, and devastating when they occurred. Fleets took months to reposition. Intelligence arrived weeks or months too late to matter. Victories could not be exploited. Defeats could not be pursued. The war had become a stalemate measured in lost ships and empty space. This was different. There had been no engagement, no weapons fire, no maneuvering. Whatever the humans had deployed had not fought the Cathari fleet. It had erased the space it occupied, and then, just as cleanly, it had stopped. The Cathari High Council took nearly a day to reach consensus. If the humans had intended this as a weapon, then the war had already been decided. If they had not, then something far more dangerous had occurred. A delegation was assembled. 3 command vessels departed the Cathari homeworld on a direct FTL trajectory towards Sol. Even at superluminal speed, the journey would take days. Earth detected the ships long before they arrived. No challenge was issued, no defenses were activated. Human fleets remained in port. The war, such as it was, paused in silence. When the Cathari vessels translated into the outer edge of the Sol system, they transmitted immediately. "We come to surrender," the message said. "We request terms and cessation of hostilities." Human command did not answer. The silence stretched longer than any weapons lock ever had during the war. Cathari sensors searched for signs of ambush. None appeared. Earth remained still. Then a new signal resolved on the channel. Human, unencrypted, calm. "Cathari delegation," the voice said. "We welcome you to the Sol system. Please come as friends." A pause followed. "We are deeply sorry for the loss of your fleet," the human continued. "It was not our intention to harm them." On the Cathari command bridge, confusion rippled through the officers. This was not how wars ended. Surrenders were accepted, not apologized for. Victors did not invite enemies forward unarmed. They considered the possibility of deception. If it was a ruse, it was unlike any doctrine they knew. The Cathari ships advanced slowly, weapons unpowered, every system prepared for betrayal. None came. The meeting on Earth was restrained, almost austere. No tactical displays, no armed presence, just representatives of two species that had spent a decade failing to defeat one another. "You annihilated a fleet," the Cathari commander said. "You could have claimed decisive advantage. You could have dictated the end of the war." "We know," the human diplomat replied. "Then why did you not?" "Because it wasn't a weapon." The humans presented the records: drone telemetry, containment failure curves, quantum instability traces, audio from the drone's final seconds, procedural, methodical, unaware. "This device was an experiment," the diplomat said, "a quantum-based communication platform. It was designed to transmit information faster than any ship could travel. It failed while your fleet was too close." The Cathari commander studied the data in silence. "You could have let us believe otherwise," it said at last. "Yes," the human agreed, "but that would have made the war inevitable again." The commander's crest shifted. "For 10 years," it said, "this war has persisted because neither side could act fast enough to matter." "Yes," the human said, "and that was the problem we were trying to solve." Silence settled over the chamber. The treaty that followed did not declare a victor. It declared an end. Borders were clarified, fleet movements restricted, test zones established, reparations discussed and remarkably agreed upon. And then came the final clause: joint development. The failed experiment had revealed the solution both sides had been missing: communication that could outrun fleets. Decisions that could arrive before consequences hardened into catastrophe. The war had been fought in silence. Peace, they decided, would not be. As the Cathari delegation departed Earth orbit days later, one of the human engineers spoke quietly. "A decade of war," they said, "ended by an accident." The diplomats shook their head. "No," they replied, "ended because we finally learned how to talk." In the weeks that followed, the war did not end with a final victory. It ended with understanding. The drone had never been a weapon. It had been a communicator, a zero-point powered attempt to speak across 100 light-years without waiting weeks or months for an answer. The explosion wasn't an attack. It was the cost of pushing too much power through a system that had never been meant to carry it. That failure changed everything. Human and Cathari scientists worked together to rebuild what had been lost. Not the drone itself, but the idea behind it. A way to talk faster than fleets could move, faster than fear could grow, because the war hadn't been fought with guns. It had been fought in the silence between messages. And now, at last, that silence was ending.